It isn't vengeance. It's just a review by people who haven't read the book. Let's talk about the Count of Monte Cristo.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Out of the Storm podcast. So today we'll be discussing or debating the of Monte Cristo. So before we get into that, you already know what time it is, what part of the session this is, and this is us giving you movie recommendations. So, guys, what's the best recent thing that you've seen that you want to plug in our audience on?
So I can go first. So the best thing I watched, I actually don't know if I said this last episode, but was...
Is it Arcane again?
It's not Arcane again. It could be Arcane. It could be Arcane every week, but it's not Arcane this week. It was Cross on Amazon. For those that don't know, this is about your typical kind of like detective story. There's a serial killer on the loose, and he has to sort of kind of like work to figure out what's going on. At the same time, something from his past is haunting him, where, you know, this particular person is stalking his family, threatening him. Essentially, his wife died, and this person is kind of like bringing back up his like dead wife's memories, as well as like stalking his kids and stuff like that. So yeah, what can I say? It's your typical kind of like, you know, detective kind of like action crime show. Is there anything specific about this one that was like of interest? I mean, the serial killer was interesting. His whole sort of purpose of killing was to recreate previous serial killers. So he would sort of abduct the person, repurpose their image to sort of match a previous serial killer to kind of fulfill his sort of like whatever fantasies he had going on, or sort of his worship of previous serial killers. To be fair, I'm kind of like waffling at the moment because there isn't anything that's like super outstanding about it, but it's just one of those shows that, you know, it's just like a people pleaser. It's like, you know, your typical detective story. There's some type of crime going on, and he solves it pretty much. So if you're into that type of show, then Cross is definitely worth checking out.
I actually have a little bit of a rant about that. Like Amazon has been pushing the ads for that one really aggressively. And I really tried to figure out what the show was about, and it just wouldn't tell me. So this is my old bugbear of, hey, how about your marketing tells you what the show is about, instead of just, hey, new show, watch it.
Yeah.
And
interesting. So what were they like pushing it as? Because I didn't.
It's a cop show. Watch it. That's the marketing.
Oh, I mean, I don't think I did a better job than what they did, because it basically is a cop show, basically.
That's why I perked up a little bit when you started talking about it, because I said, hey, finally somebody can tell me what the show is about. I'm not gonna invest like several hours of my life just on the off chance it might be good, right? Somebody has to sell me on it, right? And the marketing sure isn't trying.
I don't think I did a better job of it, to be fair, but it literally is just another cop show, and I don't think it does anything significantly better than anything that you've probably seen before in that genre. But it's just another good installment in that genre for anyone that likes that genre, is what I would say about it.
Me, I don't know if I've mentioned this before. Yeah, so I was watching City of Gods, The Fight Rages On, based on a movie called The City of God, and I think the timeline is 20 years afterwards, and pretty much just shows kind of like the conflict between the police and traffickers and militias, like and how that like affects the community, and that's all kind of like happening in the favela. I think that's how you say favela, but yeah, in the hood of Brazil. And it's lit, man. It's crazy. It's fun. It's a fun watch. My type of show.
Does it justify its existence? Because City of God is very much considered a classic by sort of most people that have watched it. It's one of the ones that, you know, people like, similar to what Gladiator was, where it's like it's a classic from the early 2000s. You know, probably shouldn't be touched, but they've turned it into a TV series. So in that sense of like kind of like viewing it as a classic, does the TV series do enough justice to kind of sort of continue the story, or is it just a bit of a money grab?
I think it's justified, because it's like, for example, you know, with Batman and the Penguin, right? So even though, like, you know, like Gotham, for example, there's so many stories that you can tell in Gotham, similar to the favela. There's so many stories you can tell in the favela. I think it's definitely justified. There's a lot of stories that you can do in that hood of Brazil. So yeah, I think it's justified. Especially the acting is great. Obviously the performance, same thing, but the story is great. Obviously you see, I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a guy, the main gangster in the City of God. I think his name was Z or Little Z, one of them. But obviously the kids that, if you guys haven't seen it, apology spoiler, but so the kids that end up killing him in the movie, one of them, the main guy, I think his name is Lil Z in the actual series. He obviously grows up, and obviously you see him, I think he starts off in prison in the first scenes in prison. Obviously you see his story and how that ends up, you know, I wouldn't really say flourishing, but so far it's crazy. It's crazy. So yeah, I'd definitely say it's warranted.
So the best thing I watched this week is A Pack of Lies from 1987. And this apparently made a fairly big splash when it came out, but I had not heard of it before. But I kind of stumbled across it randomly, and it's essentially the true story of the Soviet spies that got arrested in the 80s in London. Those events inspired a play which inspired the movie, and it's from the point of view of their friends and neighbors, right? So you've got this suburban middle-class family in like 1987 London or something like that, and it turns out that their best friends are these Soviet spies. And essentially, the government approaches them and says, "Hey, we need to stake out in your house because somebody on your street is up to no good." And they basically kind of make a nuisance of themselves a little bit, and they stay for weeks and weeks. And the whole thing is essentially like this really interesting drama. And it's mostly from the wife's perspective. And it's a lot about this idea of obeying authority and people's reputations and the impressions people make, and this whole idea of not making a fuss, right? Like about like where they have objections to what the government is doing and how they're doing it, but they don't want to cause a scene. And so there's like this ongoing, like slowly growing conflict between the husband and the wife, where they have different attitudes towards what's going on. And the wife doesn't want to lie to her friends about this, but the husband says if they're doing this, they probably have a good reason. And it's just a very character-focused drama that kind of unfolds over the course of the sting operation that kind of disrupts this quiet London suburb. And it's not like it's just a really solidly made movie with some interesting characters and just a nice little conflict at the center of it that kind of allows different characters to bounce off of. It takes a while to get to the point, but I really enjoyed Pack of Lies.
Cool. Well, guys, hopefully we've plugged you to enough for this weekend. But now it's time for the main event. I don't even know what happened to my accent there, but it's what it is. We move, we continue.
So Count of Monte Cristo is a 2024 French movie, one of the biggest this year in France, apparently. I think the third biggest movie in France of 2024 or something like that. And it's like the 87th adaptation of the classic novel of the same name, which essentially follows this French noble in the early 19th century who essentially gets set up as a traitor, is thrown into prison, breaks out of prison, finds this Templar treasure that allows him to essentially buy his way back into Parisian high society under an assumed identity. And once there, he begins to scheme revenge on the three people who have wronged him and who destroyed his life. So what did we think of the Count of Monte Cristo?
First, okay, despite its lengthy runtime, I didn't feel like the film to be like tedious or drawn out. So that's a good thing. However, before I get to the however, in terms of what I liked how they kind of like emphasized the darkness in like Edmund's heart, especially when it comes for like the main theme, which is revenge. Like, I don't know, if you, this is not really a spoiler. Well, okay, I'm not really going to say a spoiler, but the church scene, we'll talk more about that later. But if you guys know what I'm talking about, when, he also up, the church scene where he actually he's directly talking to God, that scene, I was like, whoa, this revenge, I'm saying his hatred and his revenge runs deep. But yeah, so I definitely liked how they kind of like, they emphasized on that. I enjoyed, the character dynamics that I was seeing on stage, especially between Dante and I don't even know how you pronounce his name. It sounds a bit Spanish, but Dante and and Haiti and Mercedes. I feel like that kind of like added the emotional depth to the story that was needed. It did feel rushed at times, which we'll get to why. So it was kind of hard to kind of like resonate with them because we couldn't see much. However, it was still kind of like, I felt like the relationship dynamics in this was a fun watch. It's hard. Apparently, this novel is like 1,400 pages. I think so. So
1,200, I think. Yeah, it's a doorstopper.
And you could see it I think you can see in Act 3. Like I said, Act 3 was just very rushed. And like I said, it's hard adapting a 1,200 page novel. It's hard to say because I enjoyed the first act and I enjoyed the second act, but it's just like with the third act, because I think the ongoing theme also was like ongoing torment. That was kind of like, how they were gonna, get their revenge rather than just killing them. It was like they wanted to kill them slowly, if that makes sense. So and they were like, that theme was, I could see it happening in Act 1. I mean, in Act 2, that's when it proper, like, you could see the birth of it and you could see how it was going to transpire. But then they kind of had to rush into it. I think it could have been a great adaptation, but just not in the format that it was presented as. I think it should have been presented as a series, which is going to be a question I'm going to ask you guys as well later. But overall, I think it was Act 1, Act 2, I think for me was good. Act 3, that told me, yeah, this should have been a series, not a movie.
This was, I'd say, very enjoyable. This was a really good movie. It had you like emotionally invested in Edmond's story, especially sort of kind of like at the start, and you kind of see sort of the betrayal and the hardships that he kind of went through at that point. There was good emotional connections throughout this. The plot, I was like watching, kind of like seeing how it was all going to unfold. I thought it was going to be sort of a bit of a murder revenge, but actually sort of the method and the means that he went through to actually sort of take exactly his revenge was a lot more clever and a lot more personal for sort of everyone that was involved or everyone that wronged him. So I know you mentioned about like the courtroom scene, Jonathan. I actually think that was almost the perfect place for sort of what happened because of certain people that were involved in this and the other. I thought that was like, the perfect place for that to happen. And like you mentioned about like the runtime, and you felt like there wasn't anything wasted. And whilst I understand, the first act and it sort of showing the depths that he fell to in the first act, I do feel like they could have probably tightened that up a little bit and used that additional runtime to sort of expand a little bit more on Act 2 and Act 3, because there was points in this movie where things were happening and it's just like you kind of just wanted more from sort of what you were getting, especially with the three sort of do I call them aristocrats or whatever, from the high side, the people that wronged him. You just kind of wanted a little bit more in depth from sort of part of like their perspective. And I think one of the kind of like main gripes I had with this was why they chose to like frame him in the first place. And maybe I missed it. But it was just like why they chose to frame him initially. And what was it all for? Like, what did it all mean? I know there was like the letter with sort of the woman on the boat at the start of the movie, but it was a bit like by the end of the movie, I was still confused as to why they sort of did what they did to him, essentially, which kind of took away from partly invested in sort of his motivation of sort of doing what he did. But I think overall, like, it's a very solid story. It's a very good, very clever sort of revenge story, not your typical sort of wait for it to unfold. I think, a lot of the acting in this was, really good. And yeah, I was just like, I was fully invested and left wanting more. And I know I'm not a part 1, part 2, and I don't know how they would have made this into a part 1, part 2, but I know that there was a lot of stuff cut. And I wonder whether this could have fit into a part 1, part 2 type of movie. Or even a series. I know you mentioned the series as well, Jonathan.
So I've got good news for you, Hervey. There are 25 movie adaptations of this novel and about 30 TV adaptations. So I'm sure there's one that you like more.
But I wanted more of this one. I know there's like loads of adaptations. I want more of this one and like the characters that we had in this one and to know the actors that were in this one. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Daniel, what's your thoughts?
So I've had a rough time with movies over the last month or two, where most I've seen were just no good at all, even the ones that are quite popular, specifically Wicked, Gladiator 2, Venom 3, right? There was just a whole bunch of movies that just did nothing for me. And so I was really looking forward to this one. And for the first 8 hours or so of the movie, I was really on board, where the costumes were great, the acting was great, the pacing. I think the pacing is probably the weakest part of this, where I think they make a bunch of missteps in terms of what to elaborate on and what to abbreviate. Just to give an example, he spends a lot of time in the pit, but then there's not even a single shot of the Italian guy actually teaching him anything, even though 10 years passed, right? So that's just an example of where it felt a little bit odd in terms of what they chose to spend time on and what they didn't. And at 3-hour runtime, it's like you have a lot of time, but you also have a lot of ground to cover. And I think adaptations like this live and die by those kinds of choices. And I think this movie makes a whole bunch of different missteps, and it's hard to judge if you haven't read the book. Like, I briefly ventured into like the book fans discussion circles, and they really hate this version because it apparently gets everything wrong. But just as somebody approaching this story fresh for the first time, I thought it told a really interesting story with really interesting characters. So a lot to like in this movie. until the last 15-20 minutes or so, when it actually comes time to execute his revenge. For some of those schemes, it's actually really fun to watch and kind of unfold, like once you've seen kind of the pieces be moved into position and when he executes his plan. But then it kind of stops making sense in the last 15 minutes or so. And I have a feeling that is because where they made a whole bunch of bad choices in terms of what to cut and what to keep. And it might just be like impossible to do that correctly given the amount of time. But just as a standalone story, I had a hard time carrying the last 15 minutes, which is a shame because everything before that was really engaging. And even though there were a lot of characters to keep track of and a lot of detail, I still had a good time with it. So it's a shame that they didn't quite stick the landing for me. But overall, this felt like a proper movie and it was fun to watch. And it just was a neat window into this time and into this milieu.
So kind of going off what you said, right? So should this have been a series? Because I think you have a list of what they were actually missing in this movie.
Not exactly. I was just looking at a list of all the different adaptations, and like 30 of them are TV shows or miniseries.
Oh,
so I think just knowing how long the novel is and how much detail there is.
You had a list of what they didn't include in this movie that was in the novel.
No, I don't have that. I got an impression from how book fans talk about it, like they missed this character and they cut that short and it's better in the like this subplot is better in the book and stuff like that, right? So just as one example, so when Edmond kind of introduces himself to, I think, is it Fernand when he saves Albert from the thugs, right? Apparently in the book that is like, here it's like a very quick scene. It's like 3 minutes maybe. Very elegant. It makes sense. It gets to where it needs to go. But apparently in the books, there's this whole thing where Albert gets abducted by slavers, and Edmond has to save him, and that's how he gets kind of a foot in the door and stuff like that, right? So it's apparently the same idea, but just much more detailed and much longer. And I think that is the kind of change that an adaptation can and should make, where it kind of achieves the same thing in spirit, but then does it in much less time or in a much more economical way. And it seems like this movie sometimes gets that right, but on balance, it doesn't. At least that's how book fans talk about it.
I think you mentioned one interesting part in terms of where time was a little bit wasted, and I felt like the entire kind of like first act, everything up until him being arrested and thrown into the pit, I think it's fine, you can kind of keep that. But I'm of agreement that the entire time that they're in the pit and they're sort of kind of like plotting to escape, I feel like the movie spends too much time there, and the only thing of significance that really is sort of kind of taken out of there is this treasure or this fortune that he's sort of set to find, to obviously allow him to have the means to go and sort of exact his revenge. But there isn't anything sort of profound in that particular sort of part. I've briefly recall him mentioning about when he has the money, it allows him to sort of kind of leave his name behind and be a completely different person. But I don't know what the lesson kind of was behind that, whether it wasn't really laid clear, and I feel like they really could have tightened that part of the movie up so that we could spend a little bit more time on the other side once he sort of reestablished himself, and spend a little bit more time on him, just kind of stalking his prey, essentially stalking the sort of 3 men that he was looking to exact revenge on, because it's evidently shown that he's over a number of years he's accumulated a lot of like knowledge and a lot of information. I feel like one of the reveals, I think it was like Heidi's one, because she kind of like appears in the movie and I would be like, okay, so what's her deal? But then they eventually explain it at the end. But that essentially showed that he was doing a lot of like stalking and researching and understanding as to like the people that he was dealing with before going ahead with his plan. I feel like we could have spent a little bit more time on that aspect of it, as well as like him sort of setting up and laying out his plan.
Yeah, like for the thing in the prison, like the really important part is that gives him a reason for revenge or wanting to seek revenge. Yeah. And it gives him, like, it puts him into contact with this Italian guy who knows where the treasure is. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of it. Like, nothing else really happens while he's in prison, right? But we spent, 10 minutes there? maybe more?
It felt like a really long time.
Yeah, and I think you do need to convey this whole hopelessness and like this despair, and how he's resigned to his fate before he meets, is it Abe? like the Italian guy. But like we don't even get like a 10-second montage where he actually learns all these things, right? He's just told, I'm going to teach you all the stuff like science and philosophy and math and languages. And we just skip all of it. I'm not saying we should have spent a lot of time on it, but just like a few seconds showing this actually happening. And it just felt weird. Like it felt like something was cut. And that by itself is not a huge deal. But it's more like a little bit disorienting, where I thought, like, shouldn't that be there? I think it just makes a whole bunch of these choices throughout the movie that are not quite optimal.
Yeah, the whole time like that was unfolding, I was just kind of waiting for that Batman Dark Knight Rises moment where, you know, he has that like that eventual speech, like, you know, there's like this again, you know, in that movie, Batman's like down to his lowest. He's like trying to like build himself back up, but he hasn't quite got that thing in him to sort of allow him to make that leap, essentially. And then he gets that like piece of wisdom which allows him to sort of, you know, go a little bit further and goes a little bit farther and sort of, you know, release that fear that he had inside of him. And I feel like something like that, and obviously it doesn't need to be to that level, but just something like that was, you know, what was needed in a particular part of the movie.
Especially considering so much of the movie is preparation, right? Like he spends a lot of time just moving pieces into position, and like the actual scheme is over in a few minutes, right? Like it's basically the court trial. But like there's a whole bunch, like I think it's quite awkward how sometimes this information is seeded. Like this whole thing about what's the guy's name? The Villefort, right? The prosecutor, about how he essentially tried to kill his son because he's illegitimate and was then saved at the last moment. I think like that is a very quick scene, but it's really important, right? And then you have this, like one of my favorite sequences in the entire movie is when he invites his targets to this Paris mansion, right? And it happens to be the one where Villefort had buried his son, right? And he's essentially torturing Villefort throughout the entire thing because he keeps applying the pressure, right? At first, it's the house that he recognizes, and that could be a coincidence. But then he keeps adding detail, and he just keeps cranking up the pressure. And all his friends are delighting in how salacious the story is. And Villefort is just being tormented the entire time, and he cannot tell anybody, least of all his wife, right? And that ends up driving like a wedge between them, right? Because if I remember correctly, like that, like their reactions to that, like they essentially it kind of tips off the wife that he didn't in fact kill their son, right? And that kind of drives a wedge between them. But yeah, this entire scene.
Yeah, it was his mistress, not his wife.
Because she was married. Doesn't the wife know about? Or didn't he marry his mistress?
I don't think the wife. Yeah, I don't think the wife knows.
The mistress was the boat captain's wife. So he was sleeping with his wife. So it was still his mistress.
But I think then the wife found out about it, right? Because anyway, but like it's like the way the fear of being found out kind of is applied to him. Like I wanted more of the movie to be this way, right? Where like he's without actually doing very much. Like he's just sitting there telling his story, but there's like all this pressure coming through the implications of what he's saying, right? Or what Villefort knows, but is not said outright, right? And like that was the part where I was having the most fun with the movie, I think.
Okay, no, I agree.
So how do you feel about so in terms of the themes, right? So revenge, like the whole plot, especially when it comes to plotting and kind of like the ongoing torment. Do you feel like that was executed well enough for it to be a movie, obviously based on a novel, in comparison to the novel, or do you think that was rushed as well?
So, I mean, I'm not sure that revenge is exactly the theme, right? It's like, it's about
one of the
seeking revenge, right? But like story-wise, there's not much going on with that. Like the plot is about him seeking revenge, right? But I think the underlying themes are more things like, there's like, I found this theme of false virtue, right? Where his friendship to Fernand is fake. His love to Mercedes is fake. The justice that Villefort dispenses is fake, right? So everything good in life is fake in this, right? And he kind of like exploits that a little bit, where nobody can really be quite honest with each other, and everybody's kind of built their lives on this fakeness, on these lies. And Edmond essentially kind of just exposes parts of it, and that's enough to make the entire house of cards fall down, right? So that was one theme I found in there.
Yeah, I think what was interesting about that as well was just like how easy money was able to kind of like penetrate through sort of kind of like the fakeness and make him feel.
Too, yeah.
And there was like even like the line about like not knowing if you're like a friend or an enemy or something like that, but like, you know, you've got like extreme amount of wealth or whatever, and you know, he just kind of was able to use that to kind of just gain so much favor and gain so much sort of trust out of these people, because it's like the one thing that they all respected was money and nothing else, and like you said, everything else around it was fake. Even like the relationships that sort of they had between them, you know, one was sleeping with the other person's wife, it was all like pretty much artificial, and just propped up on just like their positions in society and sort of, you know, their status and their wealth and things like that.
You guys think money was going to be such an influential factor when it comes to the main character? Because I didn't see him kind of using like weaponizing money for like when it comes to plotting against his enemies. In like, because you know, usually it gives you a hint with when the character's introduced, right? Or like something like foreshadowing stuff. But I don't think I saw anything where I was like, okay, he's going to become super rich and he's going to use money to weaponize as a weapon against, you know, his enemies.
Well, the money is basically a social cheat code, right? Because he has the treasure of the Templars, he basically has infinite money, and that means he can do anything he wants, right? He can create the appearance of nobility. He can buy anything, like any status symbol he wants. He just invents an English banker, which it took me a little bit to figure that out, because apparently in 1800 France you could just invent a person. The government wouldn't catch on. Like Halifax was not a real person, right?
Yeah. That's what I was thinking as well. When I saw him, I was thinking, wait, but who the hell is he, and how did?
I thought it was some guy they had bribed or hired or something, but no, it's just Fernand in a wig with the most amazing English accent. That was wonderful. Like a French actor speaking French with an English accent, trying to be as obnoxious as possible. Like I greatly enjoyed that. So seemingly, you can just invent a guy, and you can just kind of get newspapers to print stuff, right? Like the money is not the goal, right? If money was the goal, he would just take the treasure and then go somewhere, move to America or something or whatever, right? And just have like live in luxury for the rest of his life. The money is what allows him to hack society, right? And to enact revenge, right? He can create the reality that he needs to exercise his revenge, right? And that means, like, seemingly nobody has heard of the Count of Monte Cristo before. Nobody asks any questions as long as he has enough money.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't know if this is a plot hole or not, but surely somebody would ask, hey, like, where does your family come from? Or whatever, right? Like, we've never heard of the Monte Cristos before. You know what I mean? Like,
wasn't there an addresser for that? Like, didn't someone address who he was in the line where I think someone said, it doesn't matter, he's a king or he's a millionaire. I think it was the son. I think what's his name?
Like I worry about details when he's rich.
Yeah.
No, like they do address it. It's more like, do these people not all know each other?
Yeah, but it seems like that's that. So I'm guessing that's pretty much what the attitude was like, in terms of just like what it was like back in the day if you're rich. And you did also say people can just make like they can make.
Yeah, and he presented himself to be like half Italian, half French as well. So he like kind of like come from Italy. So I think at the time you can maybe kind of forgive people for not having, you know, 100% knowledge of, you know, every wealthy person that was across the seas or across the land.
He certainly has a story for why he was overseas for a long time and stuff like that, right? Which also makes him more interesting and more mysterious to his targets. Yeah, it's just that's one of those things where I'm not sure if that's a plot hole or if that's just how it was. I don't know.
The one thing I had a question about was the whole like mask or like face stuff, because I was like so confused. I was like, all of a sudden he become the god of many faces from Game of Thrones, because he just kept like he was putting on this mask, and when he took it off, it looked really fake. But then when he had it on, it was actually his face, and no one could kind of tell. So I was like a little bit confused as to whether there was like some type of not supernatural element to this, but just like I don't know. I don't know if it was explained and if I missed it, but I was just like so confused about that part. I don't know whether you guys had any question marks over it or just accepted it for what it was.
I don't know if there's any special skill behind, if this is something the Italian guy taught him. But I think he wears the mask twice, right? Once when he is involved in the kind of the mugging of Albert, right? Am I right about that? Where he has to appear to be somebody else, but it's in the middle of the night, and so the mask doesn't have to look perfect. It just has to look good enough in the streetlights. And then the second time is when he pretends to be Halifax. But there he's well lit and he's up close, and I'm not sure why that is convincing. I don't know.
Wait, is he not in the mask all the time as well, just like in general? To me it looked like he looked like a completely different person. Anytime he had like the moustache and like whatever, it felt like he'd like put on a face for that.
I didn't pick up on that. I thought he was just like, it had been 15 years and he has different facial hair, and everybody assumes he's dead. So he looks a bit familiar, but nobody makes the connection other than Mercedes.
I feel like that was an inconsistency, but it wasn't something which was like, oh, that ruins the movie, to be fair. Because I remember when he saw his wife, or ex-wife, and then she said, like no one, not even his just wife, but whenever he saw people, like they couldn't recognize it. I'm like, bro, I'm pretty sure that I would have recognized someone that I killed. You know what I'm saying? Or, you know what I'm saying, sent someone to, you know what I'm saying, the pits of hell.
Or
So
he
I don't
looked
think that.
looked somewhat like familiar or something like that, or someone who
Yeah.
would like even like I felt that about the son as well, the illegitimate son, because there is a scene where is it Gerald, the whatever his name is, the prosecutor, where he like when they're on the hunting trip and he like looks at him quite closely.
Nah, but he was a baby though.
He was a baby, but like, you know, someone even
There might be a family resemblance, and
or something like that. Yeah,
like subconsciously he seems a bit familiar or something. Yeah, but
yeah. Like,
But that's
yeah.
hard though. Like I think that I get what you're saying, Happy, but I think with that encounter was just right because like I'm not. There's so many people that look like you're gonna find a look-alike, and it's kind of hard to say, oh yeah, I killed you. You're my son. I killed you when you were a baby. Do you know what I'm saying? It's hard because they're gonna grow up, and I get you'll see some resemblance, but at the same time, it's very like it's rare. Like I'm pretty sure you won't know if you know.
I took it more as that guy could be my nephew or something like that, right? Like it's more along those lines. But I thought actually like the look was more about how casual Jean was about killing the deer. Like he'd done it before and stuff like that. I think that impressed Villefort.
Andrea.
Is it Andrea? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think like how casual and practiced he was about slitting somebody's throat. That kind of impressed Villefort, I think.
Yeah, I mean this movie did have like some good kind of callbacks, because you know that's one where he obviously paid attention to him sort of slitting the animal's throat, but then at the end of the movie, it's him, like he also slits his father's throat, so that was like a nice like kind of like callback. And what I actually also liked as well was Heidi's, is that Heidi, her reveal
Or
for her
probably
motivation.
AD or something like that. I don't know.
Eddie, I don't know. I don't know.
We should have invited a French speaker on the panel for this one.
Probably. I mean, it's not like we don't have two on here. What was the guy?
No,
Albert's father. But anyways, Albert's
That's
father,
Fanon.
like Fanon, yeah, who was sort of the military guy. Because you see him coming back from war, he's got like the patch in his eye, like, you know, decorated wherever he's being celebrated. And you
Also,
kind of
false nobility, right? Again, a virtue that's fake.
yeah, exactly. And you kind of like not pay it no mind, but you're like, okay, cool. And you see sort of and I think what I took most from that was Edmond's kind of like lurking in the background. I think that's like one of the first times that he was, you know, lurking around some of these characters. But then it's like later revealed that no, he actually got shot in his eye because like you're saying about like his false ability is that, you know, this family brought him in, and you know, all he knows is how to sort of betray and like backstab people that sort of are sort of close to him, or sort of kind of like welcome him in. So I thought that was like a nice like kind of like callback and a nice additional context as to sort of what happened to him in his eye and this and the other, and just like added a little bit more depth to sort of understanding his character a little bit in this. And also, sorry, Jonathan, this is why I say, because you said about sort of the whole like courtroom, and I don't know whether you said it wasn't like the right place or it being.
I think it came too
whatever.
soon. It came too soon.
Okay, but I thought that was like, in terms of like the setup and like how sort of that scene played out, I thought like that was like the perfect place for it, because you're in is it Gerald, the prosecutors? You're in his arena essentially. You're in his court. Like, but you're in his home basically, and you have the audience of sort of everyone that respects him, sort of all of his peers, all of his colleagues, all of sort of the other sort of aristocrats that are sort of in attendance as well. And that was like the perfect place to sort of expose him for essentially what he was, and like that he had this illegitimate child, and essentially just kind of like corner him and pressure him in a situation where he just couldn't squirm his way out of. And I thought that scene and how it played out was just like great to me.
And I can tie that back to the false virtue theme, if you let me try. So I think Villefort could only have beaten in a court of law, because outside the court of law, he's a corrupt thug, right? Like he will use his authority to intimidate and silence and buy off people. In the court, he can't do that. He actually has to play by the rules. That is the one place where he has to answer the questions, and where he can't deflect, and where he can't threaten, he can't intimidate. So he could, I don't think he could have been defeated anywhere else. And that kind of also ties into this thing about like that actually the justice system is actually fairly functioning. It's Villefort who is the problem, right? Because he is the one who is corrupt, and he's the one who abuses the rules while at the same time not respecting them. And now he's forced to observe them, and that is where he gets cornered and trapped.
No, guys, I agree. What I was saying is it came too soon. So because the whole point I made before about the ongoing torment, right? I think that's
it comes after more than 2.5 hours, so I'm not sure too soon applies.
But when I say too soon, because the reason why I say that is because the ongoing torment wasn't really ongoing torment. I think there was only one scene with obviously the dinner scene where he was telling the whole fake story about him killing his child. And then after that was how else did they torment him? I don't even know if they tormented that. In terms, not even him, but just like because there was 3 people that were supposed to get tormented, right? And they didn't really get tormented. There was only one scene with the guy, as in like with Andre. I think it's Andrea, his dad. Yeah, right. So he's the only one that really received revenge. Like a revengeful act was acted upon him, whereas everyone else, it was like I don't think they really like. I don't think they really got off.
I would say like, is it Dantes? Dantes, the guy that had like owned all the boats and stuff. I feel like he was like perfectly manipulated, and his revenge was what he'd done to the previous person, where he made the ships disappear, and then inherited all of the guys wealth, or bought him out or whatever, and then magically the ships reappeared, and then Edmond essentially played the same tricks on him in this movie, in that he just kind of like kept manipulating him, again like seducing him with the money. Put him in a position where he thought that he was about to lose everything, or like gave him this like false sense of security, or like essentially played on his greed. Is essentially what he did.
I was going to say it's the greed, right? Because he says, I'm gonna give you this, I'm gonna set up the situation where you need a loan, but I'm the only one who will give you the loan, and because you think I'm your friend, you will not question the small print. Yeah,
and essentially because he's already seen. Sorry, it's because he's already seen his character in a sense of like people believe his stocks are plummeting, but he knows the truth behind it, and he feels like he's got that inside information that like the ships are actually there and they haven't been taken away. And this plot by like Lord Halifax, he's played on what he knows his intention and his characteristics are going to be. So whilst Gerald, the prosecutor, got a little bit more tormented, he got completely played and manipulated for the greed and force of the gluttony that he had within him, essentially. So it was a different psychological game that he was playing with him.
And the torment is not about taking his money; it's about him having to live in poverty for the rest of his life.
I understand
that is the torment. We don't see it.
I hear that. I understand that, and I saw it. However, I think it's just the way that it was presented. Like, I think it was lacking close encounters, because I think with Andrea's dad, that felt more personal, and it felt more like a personal attack, not because of the way that it was done, but it's just the way that I think it was more, like I said, it was more personal. It felt very close in terms of like, it was like he was attacking in direct, whereas the other guys, it was more so within the group. So it kind of didn't feel as impactful, even though I can see what he was doing. I do agree with what you guys are saying, but it just, like I said, it wasn't really like a close type of attack. It felt very long range. So then when it finally hit at the end, it's like, okay, I own all your ships. I'm like, okay, yeah, I get that. I see what you're doing, but there wasn't like any scenes where they just had, for example, like a one-on-one, for example, and where they were just talking.
I mean, the other, like, for me, it's just a different type of like psychological game that he was playing there, because you can't play the same game for all of them. The different scenes, they all have their different the different things. So when you've got someone that lives for money and sort of really cares too much about money and sort of is like extremely greedy, you have to sort of kind of like sucker them into a position where they feel like they're about to sort of amass this like mass fortune, and then out of nowhere you just do a complete rug pull on them. And then like I love that scene at the end of the court where sort of he sort of has that conversation where he still thinks like he still thinks that the Count is on his side, and he's like, oh, like, you know, I just need a little bit more time to pay back the loan. But then it's at that moment where the Count's like, no, this is what.
No, how about I call in that now? Because that's what
Yeah.
you would do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I literally take everything away, and if you don't want your family to starve, you better go and get the hell out of the city, pretty much. And in terms of even like the whole like court scene, I feel like it had to play out that way because once he takes one out, the other two will be sort of kind of like wise as to sort of know his tricks. So he had to play it in a situation where he can take out pretty much all three at the same time. I mean, Fernand's was a whole like different. That was like a lot more personal for sort of for him, in a different sense where he took his wife, but he had to play it in a situation where he could take out minimum two at the same time, and it was just perfectly set up for him to do so in that environment.
I thought that entire sequence was really genius, where like we see him put these pieces into position over a long period of time, and the time where he's moving the things into position that need to be in position, so that he moved the pieces into position, that takes even longer. And then it all comes together in this like 3-minute sequence where the trap just snaps shut and he takes out two people in 2 minutes. I thought that was really genius. That was probably the best part of that entire movie. And so it's like you said, it's even weirder that Fernand was not part of that, right? That Fernand, like he basically gets like he gets two people by tailoring their punishment to their sins, right? Like greed and like abuse of power, right? And that's their undoing in the end. But Fernand, it's just a duel. It seems a bit weird. Like if I didn't know better, I would say they ran out of ideas. But surely in the books, there's a reason why it happens this way.
His method was different, and it had to be different because obviously they're all different characters, different personalities. So you're gonna have to go over it at different angles. So I do agree with that. So I will agree with what you guys are saying. But when it comes to the end, like the ending, right, the duel between Fernand, how did we feel about that? Because I'll be honest with you, like that was a bit. That's where I felt like it was really rushed. Like, I do get that he made a promise to obviously his ex-wife.
To be fair, actually, he was, because I know you said that he wasn't, going after Fernand in sort of the same way, but he was kind of doing it. But it's just like his plan didn't follow through because it was meant to be Heidi who was meant to win the trust of his son, and then eventually sort of betray him and actually sort of I don't know, maybe kill him or something like that, because he was saying like, you know, the son has to pay for the sins of the father. So actually he was going about it the same way. It's just that the plan just didn't get executed because Heidi actually fell in love with the son, and you know, she kind of overcame her hate and overcame the negative feelings that she was harboring for for the man because of the love that she had for Albert. So actually, I will give the movie that. I do believe that the betrayal aspect of it, because that was his character, was there in that. But then it's just like, after that, what do you kind of replace it with? And the sword fight was, I would agree, a little bit underwhelming in that sense.
I guess I missed like what the actual plan was. It just seemed like there's this sequence of events where I've already forgotten the details, but that ends in Albert challenging Edmond to a duel, right? And that like there's this like 5-step sequence where it all spirals out of control. But I guess I just didn't really pick up on what the plan for Fernand what was in the first place, what it should have been, and why those two, like why that plan no longer works if Albert challenges him to the duel. I guess I must have missed something there.
Yeah.
For me, like I get it. I understand why it got to that point, because obviously pretty much his whole plan collapsed after the son found out. So I understand that it kind of had to get to that stage. However, it's just that whole interaction felt very anticlimactic. I was expecting just more emotion and just like something to transpire, but besides, you know, a few lines to each other and then straight sword fight, and then, you know, and then for it to end the way that it ended. So, but I do understand why it got to that point. But at the same time, it just felt anticlimactic because it was such a build up, and then the build-up leads to him getting stabbed.
I think as well because that one was meant to be the one that was most personal to him as well. Because
Exactly.
that was one that was like closest to him. He was like marrying into that family, and then not only
Wasn't
did
that his
some of-
niece?
No, there was his cousin. It was his cousin. or
Fernand.
something.
That was
Like,
his cousin, right?
Mercedes was his cousin, I believe.
And he married her.
And he married her. I mean,
It's
I don't judge him.
nobility. It's no big
Yeah,
deal.
it's that whatever. Yeah, but essentially that was meant to be the most personal one. So you kind of wanted probably the most satisfying.
But the gut punch was that Mercedes says in the beginning that she loves Edmund no matter what, and Fernand says something like he's happy for them, like I would never get between you two, something like that, right? And then at the first chance he backstabs and more. Like that was the betrayal that needed to be avenged, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
So I don't know. Does it make it a better story if this genius master plan works on 2 out of the 3, but not the third one, and then the third one just comes down to a sword fight?
I would say if there was significant learning from Edmond's part on why his plan didn't work, like for Fernand, because again, it was, Heidi was upset about Andrea's death, and he was saying that in his like quest for like vengeance and and revenge, he was just like fueling more hate and more and more negative emotions into both of them, essentially, and just kind of like reminding them of the negativity and the wrongs that had happened to them. And she was able to get past it. She was able to re-find herself in Albert and kind of like find kind of like a new purpose in life, whereas he was like so. I actually think it would have been more satisfying if he died, because he was like so focused and so solely about exacting his revenge that he probably should have fallen the sword at the end of the movie, because he wasn't able. He was like ultimately consumed by it, and he wasn't able to find the line. Maybe it could have been a case that where Mercedes was trying to like, she understands, but maybe try to like pull him out of the darkness that he was the darkness that he fell in. But yeah, the whole like the sword fight. He wins, and then he kind of like sails off into the sunset. It probably doesn't have that. It doesn't have that satisfying ending of a conclusion to, this person that was done wrong and solely about revenge and vengeance. It doesn't quite have that I'm happy with how things ended off.
So one thought I had about this as I was trying to process this movie, right? So there's a lot going on, there's a lot of characters, and that's already way cut down from what the novel apparently does. I got a very brief glimpse of the novel, and it's just much more complex than this. And I think there have been dozens of attempts to adapt this, and I don't know how good those are, but I had a little bit of a feeling like, just in the synopsis of the novel, that this was kind of a Game of Thrones situation where you have all of these subplots and characters that, even if they seem insignificant, kind of all hang together and everything influences everything else. And so you have either, like, if you can't adapt the whole thing because it's too complex, but you also can't cut things because then it stops making sense. And pretty much every complaint I found from a book fan is that this, cutting this small character removes the emotional resonance from the plot of this other small character, and the connotation of this event is completely different because of that. And that just reminded me of A Song of Ice and Fire discussions about Game of Thrones, where like a lot of things, if you cut small things in season 2, essentially break season 5, that sort of thing, because everything is so interconnected. And it just seems to be a similar situation. Like, one of my pet theories for why Game of Thrones failed is that they could have, like, they didn't fully commit to which subplot to adapt, right? So in Game of Thrones, you cannot adapt the entire thing as written, but you can tell a story about the War of the Five Kings, right? But then you have to be very careful about what you cut, and you have to think the ramifications of each cut through. And if you don't do that, then you get things like Cersei drinking wine on a balcony for 2 seasons and stuff like that, right? Like stuff that simply doesn't make sense, but you can see kind of the seams where they cut out a plot, right? And I have a feeling that this is similar. Not having read the novel, I can only speculate, but it seems a bit like you cannot adapt the story in its entirety because it's so complex. But you can tell a story about this guy who wants to engineer like revenge on these 3 people, and he tailors it to their vices. And then for some of them it works, and for some he has to improvise, right? But then it seems like they didn't fully commit to boiling down the story to that, right? Because there's a lot of other stuff that kind of happens, like this whole thing about Ade's background as the daughter of this Albanian vassal to the Ottomans and stuff like that. Like it keeps showing up, and I think there's entire subplots in the books where that is relevant, but it's not in the movie. But she still has to have that background, and so she still has to mention it and has to explain it to the audience. And so we're spending time on something that doesn't matter really, other than that she's foreign. That seems to be the only way in which this matters, right? I don't know. It's like that's kind of the impression I got, is that they kind of didn't fully think through what they had to cut and what to keep if they wanted to tell the streamlined version of the story, because that seems to be the mission here. That it's like you take this massive story and this massive book, and then you try to tell that story in one movie, but you can't do the whole thing. You can only tell part of it.
It seems like they took out the parts which they thought was going to be the most emotionally provoking scenes out of the audience. I'm not saying the other stuff which they left out wasn't going to be that, but it just seems like they tried to simplify and say, okay, what's going to be easiest to do, what's going to like connect well, and what's going to be, what are the audience going to connect with the most.
And it seems like the way you do this is you turn this into a heist movie, right? Like throughout the movie, there were like individual scenes and moments where I thought, is this a heist movie? Like where he's...
It was definitely giving money heist.
Yeah, mine's high five, yeah.
Yeah, right? Like where he was kind of moving things into position, and he was acquiring skills, and he was recruiting people. And that's the planning phase of a heist movie, right? And would this have been a better movie if it had followed the template of that and was more focused on that?
I think so, yeah. Possibly.
If the entire focus is on engineering the revenge, that's functionally a heist, right?
I think it depends on character motivation, though, because one of the characters' motivation was to hide a secret. The other one was pretty much money, and then the other one was for love. So it's like if they just revolved it around heist, like just a heist, then that's kind of hard to kind of like bring.
No, I don't mean a literal heist. I mean like
in terms of the
structure, right? Like in a heist movie, you have something you want to acquire, right? And so you hire experts who have the skills, and then you make plans and you move things into position, and maybe you infiltrate a place, right? And then you execute a plan, and then the plan doesn't work, and then you have to improvise. And then in the end, the thieves get away, either in part or in full, with what they wanted. And so here, Edmond wants revenge, right? He doesn't want to steal something, but he wants to execute revenge. And so he installs Ade and Andrea, right? He kind of... They infiltrate, right, the high society, and he moves like things into position. Like he bribes the telegraph service to fabricate the bad rumors in order to drive down the stock price of the shipping company and stuff like that, right? A lot of these pieces smell like a heist movie.
Yes,
right?
sorry, I get what you're saying now, but I think that would have been a way longer movie. So for example, like let's say it was a thing where he was trying to win the love of his ex-wife. There would have been different encounters where obviously he would have failed, improvised again, succeeded, but then failed again, and then had to go retract his steps. Like for example, like in Money Heist, so many times where the professor failed and he just had to improvise on the spot. But it took us into episode 2 in order for him to improvise on the spot and change his plan. So I think it would have worked well with the series, even though I get it, there has been more adaptations, the series adaptations and stuff like that. But if it was to follow the whole kind of like Money Heist rule, in terms, I think I agree they should have done that, but at the same time, I think it would have took. Like, it would have been hard to do in 3 hours.
It just seems like if you want to tell a slimmed down version of the story that just focuses on pulling off the revenge, that's a way to do it.
I agree, and they definitely could have worked as a type of movie. I'm just trying to feel, would I have because I actually quite liked the reveal of how the conclusion kind of like played out, and sort of not really knowing what was about to happen and what like the kind of like idea behind it was. And I know sometimes in heist movies, you think that you know what the plan is, but then they kind of like have this like other whole like side plot or like this sort of other way of sort of executing what they were going to do. But ultimately, you kind of know partially what part of the plan is. And I feel like that moment in the courtroom of sort of when they like wait for the representative of sort of Lord Halifax, and you don't kind of know, and there's like that little bit of confusion, and then it's revealed. I really like that, and in this movie, I really like that moment. So it's just like trying to like picture what something like that would have looked like in a heist movie.
Well, him executing the plan in the courtroom is the heist, right?
It's a heist, yeah. I'm just like in terms of like the knowing what the idea was, or knowing like what sort of the motivation was to like maybe like pull him of his sort of of his reputation, or like defund this guy, but like all his money is like knowing what the plan was beforehand, essentially. So like I do agree with you. Like I feel like a lot of the pieces would have worked well as a heist movie, and if they chose to remake this for the 100th time and did it as a heist movie, it probably would be a great movie. I just like trying to think of like my personal preference as to how it unfolded, and I think I do quite like the element of surprise that this had on me, and sort of not being able to anticipate the moves or anticipate sort of what was going to happen next. I think I personally preferred it in this format, although I do think the heist movie would be an equally just a good way to sort of tell the story.
Hi guys, last thoughts.
This was a thoroughly enjoyable movie. Actually makes me want to because I know you guys are a little bit more versed than I am in checking out some of the different markets for movies to watch, but this made me a little bit more interested in sort of seeing what's happening, even just like across Europe and like sort of France, Germany, and this and the other, in terms of like what good movies are being put out there. Because typically when you think about like big movie big movie like sort of areas, you think like Hollywood, Bollywood, and for Africans you think of like Nollywood and whatever. But I never really check out European movies for whatever reason. But I know there are some good ones out there. And I can't remember. I think there was like a World War one. I can't remember which one it was. That was on Netflix, which I think was a German one.
Quite on the Western Front. Yeah.
Quite on the Western Front. Yeah, that one, which was a really good movie as well. So there are good ones out there. I think I just need to open my eyes to it a little bit more and check it out, because this was thoroughly enjoyable, and I would recommend everyone to go check this out. Even though it's a very long movie, so just make sure you have time and you're not tired.
What would you rate it?
I'd give it a solid 8 out of 10.
Well, for me, I thought this was a very solid movie. I don't know why people always say French movies are dead. I don't know if it's English people that say that, but like the French people I've spoken to, they say they don't like French movies, and I don't know why they keep saying that. I really like French movies. And I try and there's one French movie that I've been trying to watch, but it's just so hard to find, which is so annoying. And it's not like on any streaming platforms and stuff. So I'm like, what is any that I can find out. But yeah, I really like French movies, and this French movie in particular, I thought it was very solid. It was enjoyable. Like I said, the first 2 acts were great for me. Third act, I'm still on the fence whether it was rushed or not. After hearing today's arguments, but I don't know. But still, like as a whole, it was solid. I had a good time. I didn't really feel any surprise elements, but that's not bad. I felt like it was like it made sense. That's how I felt towards watching this. Like each thing that happens, like, okay, that made sense. I wasn't shocked by it, but it made sense. It wasn't like the shock value in terms of like a mystery film, for example. But I had like the whole that was good. That made sense. So I'd give this one a 7 out of 10.
Yeah, so for me, I was just happy to watch a proper movie for the first time in weeks. It's just outright just a competent, solid movie. I think if you have to really know the story to really get the most out of the movie, because watching it for the first time, it's kind of overwhelming with the detail and the characters. But I have a feeling that if you really know the story, it can be frustrating in terms of what the movie keeps and what it cuts. But just as a viewing experience, I really enjoyed this. The quality is there, and I think I like it more than now after this conversation than I did after watching it for the first time, because especially last 15 minutes were quite frustrating for me, because I just simply wasn't in the heads of people really understanding why they were doing this exactly. But I have a feeling if you watch it for a second time, if you know more of the background story, I'm sure it gets better as you watch it more, I have a feeling. So for that reason, I give it a vengeance out of 5.
Damn, that needs some more French than us. But all right, guys. Hope you enjoyed today's discussion, which didn't end up turning into a debate. Sorry. Javier?
Let us know your thoughts down below. What did you think about this movie? Was this one of the better adaptations of the Count of Monte Cristo story? And what other sort of French movies are out there, or even TV series that you think that we should check out? Let us know in the comment section down below. And of course, if you liked what we talked about here today, tell a friend. And of course, if you hated us and you hated all the French accents that we did with all the names in this, tell an enemy so that they can so that they can suffer through that as well. We are.
And if you've seen other versions of the story, other adaptations, and you know one that does it better, let us know as well. Because I have a feeling the story is really cool. It's just not the most accessible.
You heard it here first. catch us. You will catch us next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.